Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter the pervasive myth that world-class performance requires innate genetic gifts. Instead, we're unlocking the actual mechanics of greatness, backing it up with decades of research. If you've ever looked at a top performer and thought, well, they were just born with it, stick around, because you're about to see exactly why that simply isn't true. So, let's dive right in by asking the ultimate question about elite performers throughout history. Are they just naturally gifted, or is there some hidden engine driving their unbelievable success? I mean, for generations, we've all kind of bought into this idea of the natural, right? We assume greatness is just hardwired into a lucky few. But as you'll see, the science tells a very, very different story. Take famous child prodigies like Mozart or Tiger Woods. They didn't just wake up one day with magical abilities. They were actually subjected to intense, deliberate coaching from a ridiculously young age. Take Mozart, for example. His dad, Leopold, was an expert music pedagogue who started training him when he was literally 3 years old. And those famous early compositions, his dad transcribed and heavily edited them. Actually, Mozart didn't produce his first true original masterpiece until he was 21. That means he'd been practicing for 18 grueling years. And this perfectly illustrates the famous 10-year rule. Researchers who've analyzed top performers across a ton of fields, we're talking chess, music, swimming, math, the whole shebang, found that absolutely no one reaches the top ranks without at least a decade of intensive study. Not a single person. Even the legendary chess grandmaster Bobby Fischer, he had to study chess intensively for 9 straight years before he hit grandmaster status at 16. There is simply no fast track here.
Moving on to Section 1, the Growth Mindset Foundation.
Now, the crucial point here is how you frame challenges in your own mind. Basically, there are 2 primary ways we view our abilities. A fixed mindset sees abilities as entirely unchangeable. If you fail, your brain just goes, well, I'm just not smart enough. It makes challenges feel terrifying. But a growth mindset, that views abilities as skills. Skills that can be systematically upgraded through effort, smart strategies, and support. When you hit a brick wall, a growth mindset says, okay, learning takes time. If I keep working at this, I'm going to figure it out.
Take a quick second to reflect on your own life. Think about those fixed mindset statements you might secretly tell yourself. Things like, I'm just not a numbers person, or I'm not a natural leader. Now, consider what support or what strategies could actually help you rewrite those limiting statements into powerful engines of growth. Because shifting that internal narrative, that is absolutely the first crucial step toward achieving anything monumental.
All right, Section 2, Grit and Stoic Discipline.
You've probably heard of psychologist Angela Duckworth. She really popularized this concept of grit, defining it as the perseverance of effort combined with deep passion for a long-term goal. What she observed was fascinating. The stamina to just stay the course, pushing through adversity, failures, and those super frustrating plateaus is often a much better predictor of true success than raw intellectual talent or a high IQ. It's really about that ability to sustain effort over years and years without throwing in the towel.
But to look at this impartially, we definitely need to acknowledge the scientific debate surrounding grit. While Duckworth emphasizes passion and persistence as this unique, standalone trait, critics like psychologists K. Anders Ericsson and Marcus Creed point out, quite neutrally, that attributing success simply to grit can be a bit of circular reasoning. For instance, saying he practiced for years so he must have grit doesn't actually explain why he practiced in the first place. They suggest grit is essentially just the classic personality trait of conscientiousness, and that our motivation is actually highly dependent on the specific situation and how we practice, rather than just tapping into some innate reserve of willpower.
Well, whether you want to call it grit, conscientiousness, or willpower, this whole idea aligns perfectly with the ancient Stoic concept of temperance. Temperance teaches us self-discipline, for sure, but crucially it also teaches moderation. See, having too much blind ambition, where you literally can't relax, you never let up, and you just drive yourself right into the ground, that can be just as destructive as having zero discipline at all. As the Oracle of Delphi famously said, moderation in all things, and that absolutely includes how we apply our own drive.
There's this quote from Seneca that brilliantly captures why the Stoics believed mental resilience is the ultimate muscle. You have to be strictly in charge of yourself. But notice the real nuance here. The Stoics believed you must hold yourself to incredibly strict, unforgiving standards while remaining endlessly tolerant and forgiving of the mistakes of others. You control your own self-discipline. You're not forcing it on everyone else around you.
And they didn't just sit around in armchairs theorizing about this stuff. Far from being weak academics and turtlenecks, these ancient philosophers actually engaged in physically grueling activities. Marcus Aurelius was a hunter. Other early Stoics were distance runners and even boxers. They purposely pushed through physical difficulty to constantly remind their bodies that the mind is the one firmly in the driver's seat. Doing difficult things is exactly what builds that unshakable internal fortitude.
Which brings us to Section 3, the deliberate practice method.
Okay, deliberate practice is absolutely not simply playing the game or just passively logging hours. It is specifically designed to stretch your abilities to the breaking point, usually guided by an expert coach. It's highly repetitive. It focuses relentlessly on your biggest weaknesses. It requires clear, lightning-fast feedback so you know exactly if you're improving. And above all, it is incredibly mentally taxing. And, let's be honest, often deeply unpleasant work.
In sports performance, they sometimes call this the ugly zone. Because think about it, if practice were easy and fun, everyone would be doing it. Deliberate practice is all about stripping away the stuff you're already good at and staring directly at what you're terrible at, over and over again. Learning to tolerate this sheer unpleasantness, to just stay in that ugly zone without quitting, is precisely what gives elite performers their massive, unfair competitive advantage.
And this kicks off what is known as the multiplier effect. You might be wondering, how on earth does anyone sustain that awful, exhausting deliberate practice for 10 whole years? Well, it usually starts like this. A tiny, almost microscopic initial advantage, like starting at a super young age, or maybe just being a tiny bit more mature than your peers, leads to a little bit of early success. That success leads to praise from coaches and parents. That praise sparks a massive surge in motivation, which then leads to more deliberate practice, which creates even more exceptional performance. It snowballs into this lifelong, self-sustaining cycle.
Because dedicating yourself to deliberate practice requires a truly staggering investment of your life, your time, and your energy, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. It's not actually about whether you have the talent. It's about your desires. What goal do you value so deeply that you are willing to endure the decades of relentless, often ugly work required to achieve it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you view your own untapped potential.